I guess no one expects to sit across from a doctor and hear they've got a countdown on their life. It wasn't like I had felt anything major, just a couple of dizzy spells here and there, some fatigue. You brush it off, you know? Maybe you're just working too hard or not getting enough sleep. But there I was, sitting in that sterile white room, looking at this man in a lab coat as he tells me I've got maybe 3 years left. 3 damn years. The words hit me like a freight train. "John, you have an incurable disease." That's what he said, and I swear the world started spinning right after that. My mouth went dry, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to say. How do you even respond to something like that? I didn't leave the office in a panic, though. I just kind of nodded along, numb to everything. After that, I went home, sat in my car for what felt like hours, just staring ahead, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do now. I mean, how do you plan the rest of your life when you know exactly when it's going to end? At first, I thought about Emma. I figured we'd sit down together, and I'd tell her what was going on. We'd cry, maybe yell, maybe she'd comfort me. I imagined the whole thing like some movie where the loving wife puts everything aside to help her dying husband. But no, reality had other plans for me. See, Emma had been acting weird for a while, staying out late, going on about her new friend Gary from work. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted her, you know? I'd been so caught up in work and dealing with my health, I didn't even notice what was right in front of me. It started with the little things, like how she'd come home smelling like a mix of his cologne and the cheap perfume she bought at the mall. Her texts would go unanswered for hours, even though she'd claim she was busy with work. But when she'd laugh at her phone like some schoolgirl, I started piecing it together. Then there were the random nights out with the girls, but somehow I never heard from any of those girls. It was always Gary. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off, but part of me didn't want to know the truth. Not yet. Not with everything else happening. But the universe doesn't give you breaks, does it? One night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to shower. It buzzed, and I saw Gary's name pop up with some ridiculous heart emoji next to it. My chest tightened, and my hands shook as I opened the message. "I can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Last night was perfect." Winky face. There it was, just like that. Black and white on the screen, everything came crashing down. The woman I'd been married to for years, the woman who I thought would be the one holding my hand when I couldn't hold on anymore, was screwing my friend. A guy I'd had beers with, laughed with. That bastard was laying his hands on her while I was struggling with the news that I was on borrowed time. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, phone in hand, reading the message over and over again until the words burned into my brain. I felt sick, like I might throw up right there on the kitchen floor. When Emma came back into the room, she saw me standing there, pale as a ghost, holding her phone. Her eyes widened for a second, but she didn't say anything right away. I handed her the phone without a word. She looked down at the screen, and in that moment, something snapped inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stared at her, waiting for some excuse, some lie to try and patch up the disaster she had made. "John, I can explain." That was all she could say. Explain? What the hell was there to explain? The evidence was literally in my hands. I didn't lose it right away. Instead, I just nodded, turned around, and walked out. I needed air, space, time to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, thought about forgiving her. Maybe she'd made a mistake, right? We all screw up. But another part of me, the part now crushed under the weight of betrayal and my diagnosis, was out for blood. I had nothing to lose anymore, and that made me dangerous. The next few days, I started noticing every little detail. How she'd take extra care getting dressed. How she'd laugh too hard at nothing. How she was always tired when it came to us, but had plenty of energy to sneak off for hours. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but them. I'd watch her leave, knowing full well she wasn't just going to work. Every time she touched me, it felt like a lie. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I had more, something solid I could shove in her face. That's when I met Sarah. She was the therapist I found when I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't sugarcoat it. And Sarah, well, she wasn't your typical therapist. She was sharp, no nonsense. And right from the start, I could tell she wasn't going to be one of those forgive and forget types. No, Sarah understood me in a way no one else did. She helped me see that what I was feeling wasn't just anger, it was survival. I was a man backed into a corner, facing the end of my life with no more time for bullshit. And Emma, well, she was just another obstacle in my path now. Something to be dealt with. Over the next few weeks, I began watching Emma more closely. I'd follow her, check her texts when she left her phone out. Hell, I even checked our shared bank account to see if she was spending money on this guy. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep she'd gone. And Gary? He wasn't just some fling. They were meeting at hotels, exchanging gifts, planning God knows what behind my back. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I kept it all locked down, biding my time. Because now it wasn't just about getting answers. It was about payback. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. No way. Not after everything I'd been through. Forgiveness was never really an option. After everything I'd uncovered, I realized there wasn't anything left to save. My marriage? It was a joke. The woman I'd given my life to, who I thought would stick by me as I stared down the end of mine, was screwing a guy I used to share beers with. Gary. I couldn't even say his name without feeling my blood boil. But I wasn't going to be the fool who just walked away. No. I had a limited number of days left, and I wasn't going to waste a single one letting her get off easy. Emma wasn't going to know what hit her. The plan started to form slowly, almost naturally. I guess you could say I've always had a bit of a strategic mind, always thinking a few steps ahead. Now, that instinct had kicked into overdrive. I knew I couldn't confront her right away. No, that'd be too clean, too fast. Instead, I was going to make sure that everything Emma and Gary had built together crumbled. Piece by piece. The first step was gathering evidence. I became obsessed with tracking every move Emma made, every message she sent, and every lie that came out of her mouth. It wasn't hard. People like Emma, they get sloppy because they think they've gotten away with it. She'd leave her phone lying around or forget to delete messages. All it took was a little patience, and before long, I had a folder full of screenshots, emails, and texts that told me everything I needed to know. Gary was just as careless. He wasn't some genius mastermind. No, he was an arrogant prick who thought he could do whatever he wanted because, in his mind, no one was watching. But I was. And I made sure to dig deeper into his life, too. See, Gary had some skeletons in his closet that went way beyond just screwing my wife. He wasn't exactly playing by the rules at work either. From what I gathered, he'd been fudging numbers and making some shady deals that could land him in serious trouble if the right people found out. I filed that information away, knowing I'd use it when the time was right. I didn't go straight for the kill. I took my time. It was all about setting the stage, making sure every move I made was calculated precise. I started small, a few subtle manipulations here and there, setting things up to make Emma look guilty in front of our friends, little accidents where people would overhear just enough to start questioning her. For example, there was this dinner party we hosted. It was all our close friends, people we'd known for years. I made sure to bring up Gary in conversation, just in passing, but enough to plant a seed of suspicion. Yeah, Emma and Gary have been spending a lot of time together at work lately. I'd say, giving a knowing look to the person next to me. The gossip spread like wildfire after that. By the end of the night, a few raised eyebrows had turned into full-on whispers. And Emma, oblivious as always, didn't even realize she was sinking into quicksand. While I was working on ruining her reputation, I began applying pressure on Gary. I blackmailed him with what I knew about his professional misconduct. It wasn't hard to make him screw up. With a few well-placed emails and phone calls, I made sure his boss started paying closer attention to his work. Mistakes were made, and Gary was left scrambling. The beauty of it all was that he had no idea it was me pulling the strings. As far as he knew, His perfect little life was falling apart all on its own. That's when Sarah really stepped in. She wasn't just my therapist anymore. She became my partner in all of this. I hadn't planned for it to go that way, but she understood me better than anyone at that point. I don't know how it happened, but we started talking about more than just my feelings. We started talking strategy, and man, was she good at it. "John, if you really want to hit them where it hurts, you have to be patient," she'd tell me, sitting across from me in her office. "Let them destroy themselves. You just give them the nudge." She was right. Sarah helped me see that revenge wasn't just about striking back. It was about making them feel every inch of the pain they'd caused me. Slowly, deliberately, I started seeing Emma less as my wife and more as a target, someone to be dealt with. Sarah even introduced me to Oliver, one of Emma's colleagues, who had his own suspicions about her. He was a quiet guy, always watching from the sidelines. Turns out he'd noticed some things about Emma at work. How she'd flirt with Gary in front of everyone. How they'd sneak off together during lunch breaks. Oliver wasn't a fan of Gary either, especially after he'd been passed over for a promotion because of him. With Oliver's help, I got even more dirt on Emma's behavior at work. Apparently, she and Gary had been getting a little too comfortable in the office, and there were plenty of rumors going around. Perfect. Another card to play when the time came. Then there was Mark, my old friend from back in the day. We hadn't talked much over the years, but when I told him what was going on, he was all in. Mark had always been the kind of guy who loved a good fight, especially when it came to getting even. He started helping me come up with ways to expose Emma and Gary, planting ideas in the minds of our mutual friends, getting them to ask questions without ever tipping them off to my involvement. The more I worked with Mark and Sarah, the more the plan came together. We were going to ruin them both, but not in some obvious way. No, I wanted Emma to unravel on her own, with everyone around her watching her fall apart, while I stood there, calm, collected, and completely in control. I didn't just want to hurt her. I wanted to obliterate her entire world. And Gary? He was just collateral damage. As the days passed, I could see the cracks starting to form. Emma was stressed, snapping at me for no reason, losing her cool over the smallest things. She didn't realize it, but she was playing right into my hands. Every time she got flustered, every time someone asked her an innocent question about Gary, I could see the panic flash across her face. She was unraveling, and I wasn't even close to done yet. Gary, on the other hand, was already on the verge of losing his job, thanks to my carefully orchestrated blackmail. He was making mistake after mistake, trying to cover his tracks, but only digging himself deeper. It was almost too easy. I kept my cool through all of it, acting like the loving husband on the surface while pulling every string behind the scenes. I wanted to time everything perfectly, so when the final blow came, neither of them would see it coming. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about control, about taking back what they'd stolen from me. Revenge, when done right, isn't a single strike. It's a slow, brutal process that tears someone apart piece by piece, leaving them with nothing. And Emma? She was about to learn that the hard way. It all started with the affair. The proof I had gathered, texts, emails, those heart emojis that used to make me sick to my stomach, was ready to be unleashed. The thing about affairs is that they're only fun in the shadows, and I was about to drag everything into the light. One evening, I decided to drop the first bomb. It was a small gathering at our place, close friends, colleagues, people who knew both me and Emma. I played the part of the doting husband, while she fluttered around, clueless about what was coming. After a few drinks, I brought up Emma and Gary's work relationship, just a casual mention to stir the pot. They've been spending a lot of time together, I said, looking straight at our mutual friend Karen, who was known for having a big mouth. The room went quiet. Emma froze. I could see her smile falter for just a second before she recovered, but the damage was done. Karen's face lit up like she had just been handed the juiciest piece of gossip in the world. Within days, the rumors were flying. Emma started getting weird looks at the grocery store, whispers behind her back during yoga class. Her phone blew up with messages from friends asking, Is everything okay with you and John? I heard some things. The second wave hit when I anonymously sent the screenshots of her texts with Gary to a few select individuals. Just enough to stir up the drama, but not enough for Emma to know who was behind it. Her social circle, the people she had been so proud to show off, started to fall apart. Invitations to brunch were suddenly lost, and the friendly chats she used to have with the other moms at the kids' school became stilted and cold. Emma was losing her grip, and she had no idea why. As her friends drifted away, the next step was to hit her where it really hurt: her job. I knew Emma's position at work was precarious. She'd always relied on her charm, her ability to flirt her way out of tight situations. But I'd learned that her reputation was hanging by a thread. I made sure that thread snapped. Oliver, her colleague, had been more than willing to help. He wasn't a fan of Emma's behavior at work, especially how she cozied up to Gary in the office, and he was already sitting on some sensitive information about her. Together, we orchestrated a few incidents. Emma missed important meetings, deadlines were mysteriously overlooked, and her boss started getting complaints about her conduct. I made sure Emma was distracted during this time, introducing new people into her life, people who played on her emotions. Oliver was one of them, feeding her misinformation, making her believe that Gary was saying things behind her back at work, that he was losing interest in her. It was all bullshit, of course, but Emma was too paranoid to see through it. At the same time, I set up a situation that led to Emma being called into a disciplinary meeting at work. She was humiliated, and the whispers started circulating around the office. Eventually, the pressure got to her. She snapped at a superior during a meeting, something she would never have done if she wasn't on edge, and it sealed her fate. She was asked to leave the company. She came home that day, pale, shaking. "I got fired," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I acted the part of the supportive husband, giving her a sympathetic smile and holding her close. Inside, though, I was celebrating. It was exactly what I wanted. With no job and no friends left to lean on, Emma became more dependent on me than ever. I made sure she stayed financially reliant on me, keeping her from finding new work and quietly sabotaging any opportunities that came her way. She'd apply for jobs, and I'd make sure they mysteriously fell through. Gary, meanwhile, was starting to feel the strain too. He wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and the pressure I'd put on him at work was starting to take its toll. He and Emma started fighting. At first, it was subtle, little arguments here and there, but I could see the cracks forming. I used that to my advantage. Oliver, who had always been a bit of a shit-stirrer, started feeding Emma lies about Gary. He told her that Gary was talking to another woman at work, that he was pulling away. Of course, I knew exactly what would happen. Emma became jealous, needy, more demanding, which only pushed Gary further away. Their relationship was built on lies and excitement. But now that everything was out in the open, the thrill was gone. Gary wasn't interested in playing house with a woman who was losing her job, her friends, and her sanity. He started pulling back, and Emma's desperation grew. I watched the whole thing unfold like a well-crafted drama. Their fights got louder, more intense. I could hear her screaming into the phone late at night, accusing Gary of cheating, of lying to her. The irony was almost too much. I knew it was only a matter of time before it all imploded. And implode it did. The final blow came when I posted a series of photos online, carefully chosen to make it look like Emma was still seeing Gary behind my back. In reality, they hadn't seen each other in weeks, but no one needed to know that. The photos circulated through our social group like wildfire, and suddenly, Emma was persona non grata. People stopped taking her calls, stopped responding to her messages. She was officially a pariah. Gary, not wanting to be associated with the drama, broke things off with her completely. Emma came home that night, broken, tears streaming down her face. "He's gone," she sobbed. "Gary left me. I felt nothing." I looked at her, this shell of a woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, and I felt absolutely nothing. My plan had worked. I had destroyed her life, bit by bit, and she didn't even realize it was me pulling the strings all along. But I wasn't done yet. After everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the lies, the endless plotting, there was this strange moment of stillness. Emma's life was in tatters, Gary was long gone, and the social circles that once revolved around her had shut her out completely. I didn't feel triumphant or euphoric, though. It was something different. Relief, maybe. Freedom, definitely. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tied down by the anger and pain she had caused. I could finally breathe. I remember sitting in the living room of the house we had shared, her crying in the next room, probably begging someone else for comfort this time, and looking around at all the things that had once meant something to me. The photos of us on vacation, the souvenirs we'd picked up along the way. It all felt like it belonged to a different person, a different life. I knew then it was time to leave it all behind. I didn't make a big scene. I wasn't about to give Emma the satisfaction of knowing she had any power over me. I simply packed my bags, sold off most of what I owned, and took off. Everything I needed fit into a couple of suitcases. The house, the furniture, the remnants of our life together. I left it all behind, just like I left her. My first stop wasn't far, just a little cabin I rented in the mountains. I'd always imagined living in a place like that. Isolated, peaceful, no one around to bother me. It was perfect. For a while, I did nothing but hike through the woods and sit by the fire, letting the silence seep into me. It was a cleansing of sorts, a reset, but the silence could only last so long. After everything that had happened, I wasn't going to sit around waiting for my time to run out. No, I had 3 years left, give or take, and I was going to make every single one of them count. That's when I decided to push the limits, to really live in a way I'd never dared before. The first thing on the list? Extreme sports. I'd always been a guy who watched other people take risks, too scared to jump out of a plane or scale a mountain. But now, what did I have to lose? I signed up for skydiving first. I'll never forget that moment when the plane door opened and the wind hit my face. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, but there was no turning back. The moment I jumped, all the fear evaporated. The rush of free fall, the ground rushing toward me, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I was alive in every sense of the word. I craved that feeling after being numb for so long. Skydiving led to bungee jumping, which led to rock climbing, which somehow led me to some of the most dangerous places in the world. There's something addictive about staring death in the face, especially when you know it's already coming for you one way or another. I climbed mountains in the Alps, trekked through jungles in South America, and even found myself in some back alley bar in Thailand, drinking with people whose names I'll never remember. It was there that I met Ben. Ben was an ex-soldier, a war veteran who had seen more than his fair share of close calls. We crossed paths in one of those seedy bars in Bangkok. He was quiet at first, keeping to himself, but there was this air about him that drew me in. Maybe it was the way he handled himself, like he'd been through hell and back and still came out standing. We started talking over drinks, and it didn't take long for us to hit it off. Ben had his own demons, stuff he didn't really talk about, but he understood what it meant to live with an expiration date. He'd been shot, blown up, and nearly killed more times than he could count. For him, living wasn't just about survival. It was about pushing the limits, finding that edge where you're truly alive. He showed me things I hadn't even considered. How to handle myself in high-stress situations, how to get past the fear that comes with confronting the inevitable. Ben became a sort of guide for me. We went on adventures that most people wouldn't dare attempt. Jumping out of helicopters, diving in shark-infested waters, and even sneaking into places we probably shouldn't have been. It wasn't just about the adrenaline, though. Ben had this way of helping me work through the psychological barriers I'd built up. He made me realize that I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of living with regrets. And I wasn't about to let that happen. That's when the other side of my newfound freedom kicked in. I'd been with Emma for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be free. No obligations, no ties, no emotional baggage. So I started exploring that freedom in ways I never had before. The first time I slept with someone new after Emma, it was like a door had opened. I wasn't looking for anything serious. Hell, I wasn't even looking for anything romantic. I just wanted to feel something different, something raw. And I did. There were no strings attached, no awkward morning after conversations. Just two people using each other for what they needed. As the weeks passed, I became bolder. I started seeing multiple women, sometimes at the same time. I didn't hold back from experimenting, trying things I'd never had the guts to do before. Threesomes, casual encounters in hotel rooms, even the occasional visit to places where the lines of pleasure and fantasy blurred. I wanted to experience everything, every touch, every sensation, every forbidden thrill. And why not? I had nothing left to lose. Along the way, I met random people who became part of my journey. Women who didn't want more than a night of passion, and men like Ben, who taught me what it meant to push boundaries. Some of them stuck around for a while, others faded into the background. But each of them left an imprint on me, a reminder that I was alive in a way I hadn't been before. But it wasn't just about the sex or the adrenaline anymore. It was about reclaiming my life on my own terms. I had been trapped in a marriage that had suffocated me, in a life that had narrowed to a single, painful point. Now, with nothing holding me back, I was finally living the way I'd always wanted to. Every day, I woke up with a sense of purpose. Not the kind of purpose that comes with a job or a relationship, but the purpose of squeezing every last drop out of life before the clock ran out. I was reckless, yes, but for the first time in years, I was free. At some point, the rush wears off. The thrill of skydiving, the fleeting satisfaction of one-night stands, even the sweet taste of revenge, it all fades. I hadn't expected it, but after everything I'd done, after pushing myself to every limit I could find, I started feeling empty. You'd think living like I had, throwing caution to the wind and grabbing life by the throat, would fill you up. But it didn't. At least, not for long. There were days I'd wake up in whatever city I was in and just stare at the ceiling, wondering what it was all for. I had spent so much time plotting Emma's downfall, so much energy on making sure she paid for what she'd done, that I hadn't considered what came next. What happens when you've won? When there's nothing left to fight against? The answer, it turns out, is a strange kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness that comes from being alone. God knows I had enough people around me to avoid that, but the kind that creeps in when there's nothing left to drive you. I'd sit there, in the middle of some beautiful view, a mountain peak or a cliff overlooking the ocean, and feel a sense of relief, sure, but also a hollowness. I'd spent my last few years chasing highs, running from the clock ticking down on me, but what had I really found? Freedom, yes, but also an undeniable realization that revenge didn't heal anything. It didn't bring back the time I'd lost, the man I'd been before all of this. It was in one of those quiet moments in the middle of nowhere that I found myself reflecting on everything. I didn't regret what I'd done. Not at all. Emma deserved every bit of it, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. I wasn't sitting there thinking, yes, I won. Instead, I was thinking, what now? That question hung in the air for a while, unanswered, until one day, when I least expected it, the past came walking back into my life. I was in a cafe, a small place I'd stumbled upon in a random town I'd never heard of before. I just ordered a coffee when I turned around and saw her. Emma. After all these years, after everything that had happened, there she was standing in line, oblivious to me at first. She looked different, not in a bad way, just different. She had aged, the way we all do, but it was more than that. She looked worn, tired, like life had chewed her up and spit her out. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of emotions rushing through me. Anger, nostalgia, maybe even a little pity. She hadn't seen me yet, so I watched her for a second, taking it all in. She was alone. No ring on her finger, no one by her side. Her clothes were simple, not the flashy outfits she used to wear when she was trying to impress. She looked like someone who had been humbled by life. I could have walked out. I could have ignored her, kept walking, kept moving forward without looking back. But I didn't. I walked up to her. "Emma." She looked up, and the moment her eyes met mine, I saw it, the flicker of recognition, then shock, and finally something like shame. She didn't say anything right away. We just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. "John," she finally whispered. Her voice was soft, almost broken. We didn't say much at first. There wasn't really anything left to say, was there? But we ended up sitting down, talking over coffee like two old friends who had been through hell and come out the other side. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask for one. It wasn't that kind of conversation. She told me about her life since everything had fallen apart. How she'd struggled, how Gary had left her with nothing, how she'd lost her job and bounced around from place to place, trying to rebuild. I don't know what I expected to feel, but it wasn't satisfaction. There was no joy in seeing her like this, no "I told you so" moment. I just listened, and somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Whatever rage I had felt back then, it was gone. I'd done what I set out to do. I destroyed her life. And now, seeing her like this, all I could think was, it's over. We didn't exchange numbers. We didn't make plans to stay in touch. We just finished our coffee, said our goodbyes, and went our separate ways. It was the closure I didn't know I needed. After that, things started to shift. I stopped chasing the highs so much. I still traveled, still took risks, but it wasn't with the same reckless abandon. I started thinking about what I wanted to leave behind when my time was up. That's when, by some twist of fate, I made an investment that paid off in a way I never saw coming. I'd taken a chunk of my remaining savings and invested in this small tech startup. It wasn't something I knew much about, just a tip I'd gotten from someone I met along the way. I figured, why not? If it went belly up, it didn't matter. I wasn't exactly worried about retirement plans, but it didn't go belly up. In fact, it skyrocketed. One day, I woke up to an email telling me that my small investment had turned into a fortune. I couldn't help but laugh. It was like the universe was throwing me one last gift, a way to live out my remaining years without a single financial worry. I was set, more than set, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could just relax. It was around this time that I met her. I never got her name, not at first. She was a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, sitting on the side of the road crying. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped. I wasn't in the business of getting involved in other people's problems. But something about her reminded me of someone. Emma, maybe. Or who Emma had been before everything went to shit. I pulled over, asked if she was okay, and we started talking. She was in a bad spot. Her husband had been cheating on her. She just found out, and she had no idea what to do. I could see the same look in her eyes that I had once seen in the mirror. Anger, confusion, desperation. So I told her my story. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to let her know that she wasn't alone. That life doesn't end just because someone betrays you. I don't know if I helped her or not. We didn't stay in touch. But I'd like to think I gave her something to hold on to, a little bit of strength to get through whatever came next. As for me, I had everything I needed. Money, freedom, and the peace of knowing that the past was behind me. The clock was still ticking, sure, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from it. I was just living. It's funny how life slows down when you realize the end is near. I used to be terrified of it, of the idea that my time was running out, that I was just a ticking clock waiting to hit zero. But now, with everything that had happened, with everything I'd done and experienced, I wasn't scared anymore. I'd accepted it. I knew it was coming. In fact, I felt ready. The doctors were right about the timeline. The disease was catching up with me, slowly but surely. I could feel it in my bones, in the way my body ached more with each passing day. I wasn't as sharp, not as full of energy as I once was. But it didn't matter. I'd lived more in these last few years than most people do in a lifetime. and that was enough for me. I wasn't going to drag this out, though. No hospital rooms, no doctors, no more treatments. I had lived life on my own terms, and I was damn sure going to die the same way. So, I started making plans. Not the grim, depressing kind of plans. No wills or funeral arrangements, but the kind that mattered to me. I decided where I wanted to go, who I wanted to say goodbye to, and how I wanted to leave this world. I was going to go out without regrets, without loose ends. The first thing I did was sell off the last of my belongings. It wasn't much at this point, just a few personal items, some mementos from my travels, but I didn't need any of it anymore. I wasn't going to be around to enjoy it, and there was something freeing about letting go of it all. My bank account was more than healthy, thanks to that tech investment that had blown up, and I knew I had enough to take one final journey. I'd always dreamed of visiting this remote spot in Patagonia, a place where the mountains kissed the sky and the world felt untouched by time. It was wild, beautiful, and completely isolated, exactly where I wanted to be when the time came. I booked a one-way ticket. No plans to come back, no need to. Before I left, though, I had some things to take care of. I wasn't one for grand gestures, but I wanted to make sure the people who mattered knew where I stood. So I wrote letters. Not the kind that gets all weepy and dramatic, but honest letters. Straightforward. I told them what I needed to say, thanked some, apologized to others, left a few final thoughts for those who had crossed my path. One of the hardest letters to write was to Emma. I'd spent so much time hating her, so much energy plotting her downfall, but I couldn't carry that with me to the end. I didn't love her anymore, not in the way I used to, but I also didn't want to die with that weight on my shoulders. So, I forgave her. Not face to face, not in any big emotional scene, but quietly, in a letter. I told her I forgave her for everything, that I didn't hold anything against her anymore. I didn't mention my role in what had happened to her, how I'd ruined her life piece by piece. She didn't need to know that. I wasn't looking for her forgiveness, either. This was just for me. I sent the letters out a few days before I left. No fanfare, no dramatic goodbyes. Just a final note from a man who was done with this chapter of his life. Then I took off. Patagonia was everything I'd imagined it would be and more. The mountains loomed like silent giants, the air crisp and clean. The solitude was perfect. I rented a small cabin in a place so remote you could go days without seeing another person. It was exactly what I wanted. I spent my days hiking through the wilderness, sitting by a fire at night, watching the stars light up the sky like they were putting on a show just for me. I had no plan, no timeline. I was just there living in the moment, knowing that one day I'd close my eyes and that would be it. There's something peaceful about that kind of certainty. No more running, no more chasing. Just calm. I thought a lot during those last few weeks. About my life, about the choices I'd made. I wasn't a perfect man. Far from it. But I'd lived. I'd taken risks, fought back when I was wronged, and in the end, found a strange kind of peace. I wasn't leaving behind a legacy, not in the traditional sense, but that didn't matter to me. I'd left my mark on the people who crossed my path, for better or worse. That was enough. There was this one evening, though, when it all really sank in. I was sitting on the porch of the cabin, the sun setting behind the mountains, the air growing colder with every passing minute. And I just knew. I knew my time was coming. I wasn't scared. I didn't feel sad. I just felt ready. I went inside, stoked the fire one last time, and sat there in the warmth, thinking about everything and nothing all at once. I thought about Emma, about Ben, about Sarah. I thought about the people I'd met along the way, the strangers who had shared parts of their lives with me. I smiled, knowing that in my own way, I had made peace with it all. I drifted off to sleep that night, knowing I wouldn't wake up. And that was okay. It was the kind of ending I'd wanted, quiet on my own terms with no regrets.